Hello and welcome to JavaScript Marathon training presented by This.Labs. My name is Sarah Renaud with This.Labs, and I will be your host today. Next up, we have Intro to NativeScript, a brief overview of what NativeScript is and how it works. You'll also learn how to create a TypeScript, Angular, Vue, and React-based app, and so much more. Today's trainer is Nathan Walker. Nathan is COO and Principal Software Engineer at NStudio. Welcome to JavaScript Marathon, Nathan.
Thanks for listening and joining, everyone.
You can find Nathan on Twitter using the handle shown at the bottom of the screen. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions or feedback. Of course, JavaScript Marathon would not be possible without our sponsors. Our sponsor today is This.Labs, your partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at this.labs.com or send us an email at hi@this.co. Do you find keeping up with constantly evolving technologies a struggle? Do you want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies? This.Labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. Contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. If you're familiar with This. You may already know that we host online weekly meetups covering various frameworks and topics each week. For the latest schedule and links to join, go to this.co. This.'s online meetups are an amazing opportunity for developers and enthusiasts alike to engage with the global tech community no matter where they are in the world. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nathan.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to all of This.media for hosting these. So welcome to Intro to NativeScript. First, I want to establish what it is, and we'll get into some details here in this presentation. So right off the bat, NativeScript is an open source framework to access native platform APIs in JavaScript directly. Now, there's a lot packed into that single sentence there, and we'll get into details of what exactly that means. But a key takeaway is that we're talking JavaScript here. So NativeScript is all about empowering JavaScript development. That's always what it's been about. This means it supports out-of-the-box Angular, React, Svelte, Vue, and coming soon to Ionic as well. Any JavaScript-driven development can benefit from NativeScript. Today, there is currently an iOS and Android runtime, which provides rich mobile development. And these are what is commonly used and been used for years. Now, there is the possibility to extend NativeScript into other environments. Like I mentioned, it's coming soon to Ionic. And we've been working with some clients on this ourselves internally, and we are excited to hopefully bring this out probably late August, most likely. Desktop runtimes are also possible, so there's some community experiments in this realm that are quite exciting, and you're welcome to check those links out on the slides if you're interested. So this is an example right off the bat of an app that was built with NativeScript, just to give you a little taste right out of the gate as to what's possible with NativeScript. Everything you're looking at was built with NativeScript for Angular in particular, and utilizes native views, but also utilizes over probably 32 community plugins that engage with different platform APIs. And this is just showing iOS, for example. The same app is available on Android. So first of all, how do you install it? It is distributed on NPM, so you can install a global NativeScript package. And I'm showing here the @RC. We are in the process as the technical steering committee for the NativeScript framework, preparing NativeScript 7.0, which will probably be released sometime late August. But this is actually an RC of the up-and-coming CLI, which introduces the NSC command line tool. So once this is installed, you get access to the NSC command line. This is often known as NativeScript or NativeScript compiler. This is what's historically been called TNS. So I'm going to present the latest here today because this is really the future of NativeScript. So NSC create is really what you will usually interact with when you first install NativeScript off the bat. In particular, when you run it, you'll get some prompts as to what flavor of NativeScript you want to generate. So as I mentioned, there's a couple flavors that are supported out of the box. Some are actually going to be added as official flavors in the NativeScript CLI in 7.0, like Svelte, for instance. You notice right off the bat, these prompts mention Angular, React, Vue, plain TypeScript, and plain JavaScript. Remember, it's all about JavaScript empowerment. And so you can just create a plain old JavaScript NativeScript application if you want. But today I'm just going to demonstrate TypeScript, Vue, React, Angular, and I'll even show Svelte as well. In addition, there are flags as well. So when you create any app, any NSC, create the name of the app, and then --TSC is the actual TypeScript version. --NG is the Angular version, --React, --Vue. And then again, right now, today, you can actually try the Svelte flavor by using this npx-digit command that will actually install and set up a Svelte sample. Once you have created an app, you use NSC run or NSC debug. This is actually what runs that runtime. So as I mentioned, currently it supports iOS and Android, but in the future, there actually might be a desktop target. So you might be able to run Mac, or you might be able to run Windows as well. Now, it's worth noting that NSC debug is what I use day to day and almost never use NSC run anymore. The reason is, for me, anytime I'm running NativeScript these days, I'm usually debugging and actively working on an app. And the difference between the two is that NSC debug is actually going to start a Chrome DevTools instance that you can actually debug the iOS or Android app inside Chrome DevTools. And I'll show that in just a moment. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So I've already generated these samples here. You can see the Angular, React, Svelte, and Vanilla and Vue sample. Now, vanilla is what most of us in the community refer to as the plain JavaScript or plain TypeScript flavor of NativeScript. We just often refer it to as vanilla, because that could be plain JS or TypeScript. Let's open this in VS Code and take a look at what this structure looks like. I'll start with vanilla, because vanilla is kind of the base framework of NativeScript. All the flavors add their own flavor to it, which is usually data bindings and markup. So with the vanilla flavor, you can see there's an XML file, which has just the frame inside. It specifies the default page to launch as main page, which we can see here as well. The important takeaways when looking at the markup is that this is a concise DSL against common components that represent the platform you're running it on. So the page is a way to represent the actual page in the device. And we can look at this on iOS and Android here. So the vanilla sample, I'll launch it here on Android, and I'll also launch the vanilla app here. So you can see we have an action bar at the top titled My App. We've got a label that says tap the button. We've got a button here that says tap. And as I tap on it, I actually get this behavior that does some data binding here. It's important to notice that the view model is supported in a standard TypeScript class. So this is where the data binding is controlled, and it acts as your controller to the view. We'll take a peek at these other apps here. So Angular, you can see, has a familiar Angular setup where you have an app module. It is written in a way that you would be familiar with as an Angular developer. The item component itself is actually constructed with the same markup here as we see in the vanilla sample, the XML, but we use HTML here because that's what the Angular parser uses. And that's also what's common for the Webpack build for Angular. But this is the markup that you use to construct the same type of markup that you would across any flavor. So if we look at React, for instance, let's go inside of the React component. You'll see the same markup, grid layout, just using JSX and TSX here in particular. And if we look at Svelte, for instance, and if you're not familiar with Svelte, Svelte's a really neat JavaScript framework as well. And you can also express the same NativeScript markup in Svelte here and control your data bindings from the JavaScript inside. And then we'll lastly look at Vue here. And Vue, as you might expect, uses all the syntax you're familiar with if you're used to developing in Vue. But you'll notice the same component markup here: page, action bar, grid layout, label. All that can be represented in any flavor that you'd like to use. Now, what I want to get into is something that's not often covered in NativeScript intros, and it's really what NativeScript is all about. You know, when we talk about NativeScript and empowering JavaScript, what we're really talking about, and this is the first point that I was making, that it provides direct access to platform APIs directly from JavaScript. What this means is that you can go right to the source you're developing with without leaving your IDE, without leaving the comfort of the language that you enjoy, whether it's plain JavaScript or it's TypeScript, and no matter what flavor you're working with. So if we wanted to develop for iOS, for instance, let's use iOS as an example. We can go right to the source of documentation. So we can go right to Apple Developer Docs. We can go right down here to, let's just look at the API docs. And in particular, let's check out the technologies that are provided on the iOS platform. By using NativeScript, you're actually liberated to use all this right away without any delay. You don't have to change the IDE. You don't have to work with a different language. So let's just choose one of these, and actually let's just start playing with this API directly. A good one that might be fun to play with is perhaps this event kit. Now, what's interesting about this is iOS and Android both have very flourishing development communities. They have people that publish some really wonderful blog posts on developing for either platform. And you could find a number of examples in developing for EventKit for iOS. And this is an example that shows Swift, for instance. But now what's interesting with NativeScript is because we have direct access to the platform API, we can actually use these APIs right in NativeScript right now. So when we're talking about the event kit, if we looked at some of the documentation, we might just try playing with the calendar chooser, which is something that's built into the iOS platform for choosing a calendar from the user's device. And if we look at this sample here, which shows a bit more detail on how to construct one of these, we notice this event store is key to actually accessing the calendar. And in particular, we need to request access. So mobile devices these days are all about privacy and security. And so for a lot of APIs that get into personal data like calendar and events, you usually have some mechanism to request permissions. And we'll do just that. So let's go here to NativeScript and let's actually see if we can create one of these. So I'm going to create a reference to the event store. And I'm just going to try constructing one of these. So it was called EK Event Store. Now right away, what's really interesting is because we have the NativeScript environment set up and we also have type declarations for the entire NativeScript framework at our fingertips, we get all of these native platform objects here to use. So EK Event Store we can construct right away. If we look back at this sample, we can see in order to request access, we need to use this request access API. So let's do that. Request access, and there it is. So again, just like you're familiar with in TypeScript, you get the IntelliSense, and we can just start coding right against the platform we want to develop for here. So we can see, of course, the first argument wants an entity type. So we can just choose an entity type here. And for our example, we'll just use an event. And we can see the second argument is a completion callback. And it takes a success. And then we also get an error here. Now, it's important to note, these are iOS platform APIs. This is not a JavaScript API. We are actually coding with the raw platform at this point. The NativeScript runtime allows this power. So this is what we're going to use to actually request access to the user's calendar. And at this point, what we can play around with is the calendar chooser here. So this is actually a view controller built into the platform, and it lets a user select one or more calendars. So let's see if we can actually get one of these to display. So I'm going to end up creating a reference to this calendar here. And we will create one called EK Calendar Chooser. Let me just create a reference here. I'll use typical camel case. And we'll type it as this type here. And I'll make the first mention of something interesting in NativeScript. So since we have access to actually construct this Swift and Objective-C object right here inside of TypeScript, you'll notice that the new constructor has a particular argument signature. Now, sometimes you don't know what that argument signature, what you want to do with that at the moment, and you may want to use a different initializer. So NativeScript provides a convenient way to actually call the same constructor with .new on the end without specifying those arguments up front. This is universal across all iOS APIs that you deal with in NativeScript, for instance. What this allows us to do is actually use one of the initializers on that object itself. And if we look at the documentation, we can see that 2 of them are mentioned here. So this initializes a calendar with this signature, and here's another type. Let's see if we can actually access those. And we can see there's the 2 constructors with the init that are mentioned directly in Apple Docs. And in particular, let's use the display style event store just to play around. You could use either. We can see the first argument wants a calendar chooser selection style. And for this, we'll use single. Looks like they support a multiple selection calendar style or a single. And we'll also use the calendar chooser display style. And for this, we'll use all calendars. We'll see what that gives us. And the last argument is this event store. So this is actually what we just got access for the calendar for. So it's important to note, this is what is known as NativeScript. This is giving us direct platform API capabilities directly from JavaScript. And we're using the power of TypeScript to actually give us strong type checking and IntelliSense against the APIs the platform gives us. So let's see if we can get this to actually show up inside of our view here. So after we've initialized this and we've gotten permission, we just need a way to actually open that. So we actually happen to have a button already inside here called tap. So we'll take advantage of that tap button to open it. Now here's something I'm going to show you a number of different ways in where NativeScript is really powerful. Now on the surface, again, you can't state enough that this is direct access to the platform. So we could use direct platform APIs here, like UI application. This is something you'll find in Apple Docs. In addition, that has a shared application instance on it, which represents the actual application reference of our running app. Again, this is not NativeScript details. This is just pure iOS development. We can gain the key window and the root view controller. Now, again, if you are familiar with iOS or not familiar with iOS, don't be scared by these APIs, because I'm going to show you actually something that NativeScript provides to abstract some of that away, just as a convenience. But I wanted to show you the true power right from the start. So root view controller provides an API that gives you something that's pretty common to iOS developers, and that is present view controller animated completion. This allows you to pass in a view controller, which calendar chooser is the view controller we want to show. There's a flag on whether to animate it when it opens, and we like animation, so we'll set that to true. And for the completion callback, we don't care about being notified on when it completes and opens, so we'll just pass null. So I'm going to save that. And now let's actually just run that here. So I'll go inside. Sample vanilla is the one that we are playing with. We'll run NSC debug iOS. And I'm going to use the emulator flag here, which lets us specifically run on an emulator. If you have multiple devices connected, it may prompt to try to run on which one. So in this case, I'm just going to demonstrate on the emulator. And also for simplicity, I'm going to use this no HMR flag. That usually deals with live reload and live sync. Webpack is used to build NativeScript projects, and there is hot module replacement. For those that are familiar with Webpack, that's a form of live sync that is usually useful for styling, really quick styling passes. But for this demonstration, I'm just going to show the live reload for logical changes here. So what we're expecting to have happen is that we've now constructed a native instance of the EK event store that is directly on the device we're developing for. We're going to request access to use it, and we're going to create an instance that has the style that we want to show, and then when we click tap, we're going to present it. So we can see right when our constructor fires, we get this permission prompt that tells us that our code actually works, because right here, when the view controller is constructed, we're actually requesting access. So we already know that that works. So we just gave permission, and now we're going to tap to show this view controller. And there we go. Now, keep in mind, what's really fascinating and fun about this is that this is a view that we did not construct. This is a view that is actually provided by the platform. We didn't have to style this. We didn't have to control it. It's already using device-specific UI style guides. So we're already interacting with the device directly. Now, of course, there's a couple different ways to interact with this. Obviously, a selection is not too useful if we have no way to actually choose done and say when we're done making our selection. So I want to show another form of this and show how to tap into some more of the power of NativeScript here. So this is considered option 1. This is really the raw option to deal with iOS, for instance, in presenting some view that's actually on the platform. NativeScript, though, has this consistent API called frame. And in particular, topmost gives you that topmost running frame. And this will give you the topmost running frame on iOS and Android. And in particular, we get an iOS key here. This represents the actual iOS frame. And off of this, we get the controller. And you can see the IntelliSense is actually giving us a description here. And this gets the native UI navigation controller associated with the frame. But curiously note that it is typed as any, and it's not typed as navigation controller. This is done by NativeScript intentionally because on iOS platform, you can actually have a base navigation controller that takes on different types depending on the type app you're running. If you're running like a tab bar app at root, if you're running some type of side drawer navigation, those are all represented as different controllers. So generally, when we use this way to access this exact same controller, we'll type it with the actual UI navigation controller to get full IntelliSense on it. And from here, you can see we actually get the same API. So this line here is actually the exact same thing as calling this, but we're using NativeScript's core modules to give us a convenient way to get at that in case we're not pure iOS developers and don't understand UI application in general, but we know we want to present some view controller from the platform. So you can see these are the same APIs that are represented off of this controller here. So I'm going to use this one. I'm going to call the same thing calendar chooser. We'll do true and null. And I'm just going to comment out option 1. We'll consider this option 2. And let's save this and see if it works exactly the same. Tap, and we get the view controller. So nothing different between these two other than we are just using NativeScript's core modules to abstract some details away to call exactly the same thing. This is a lot of what NativeScript core does, is it provides the platform to you at your fingertips. You are totally free to use it directly, or you can use core modules to use a more concise, perhaps consistent API that can work in a similar fashion against iOS and Android. So I want to show one more advanced option here just to show the sheer power we have here. So I'm going to consider this option 3. Now, if we look at this view, again, like I said, there's no navigation controls here. So there's no way to click done. And it's kind of curious, like, do we need to code some view to choose done when we're done picking? How do we even cancel out of this view? So this is where actually understanding a little bit about the platform you're coding for comes in handy. In particular, we can look at the docs here, and this is the docs for the calendar chooser itself. And if we look down here, we can see we actually have the shows cancel, shows done button. So let's see if we have access to that. So we'll get our calendar chooser, and there it is. There's an API that's stated in the Apple docs. And again, we're working directly with the platform, so we have those APIs directly available to us here. Now I'm going to take this a little step further and show an advanced concept with iOS called UI navigation controllers in general. So what we can do is we can actually construct a brand new navigation controller here to drop that calendar chooser in. The advantage in doing this is that we can actually give, and again, take advantage of the platform controls directly to give us what we need. So we want some actual navigation controls around our calendar chooser. And we're going to init this navigation controller actually with our calendar chooser. So we're dropping our calendar chooser into another powerful concept on the iOS platform that will give us this for free. And with that, we can actually take our same option number 2, present it, but instead of presenting the calendar chooser, we're going to present the nav controller this time. And now let's see what we got. And I know this might be advanced for some people on the call. This is an intro call, but this is something that's not often talked about again on intro calls, and that's the sheer power of NativeScript. So that's really what I wanted to address in this introduction. So if I choose tap now we get a much richer view. And we got a much richer view in less than 10 minutes, just by understanding a little bit about the platform we're coding on. The UI navigation controller gives us all of these navigation buttons. It even gives us the ability to add a new calendar to the user's device if we want. We can now make choices and we can choose done and cancel. But wait, done and cancel doesn't do anything. And we don't know what calendar the user is selecting. So we're going to do something really interesting on the fly here. And on iOS, there's this concept known as delegate targeting. Delegate targeting is a common theme across iOS development, and we can tap into it directly here, again, without leaving the comfort of our TypeScript, just to deal with this interaction. So what we want to do is create a delegate to communicate back and forth between our class and our view model here, and with iOS specifics and with user interaction. So in particular, we want to communicate what calendar the user's choosing, and also when they choose done or cancel. We can see mention of this right here. So this is a whole section in Apple Docs about managing calendar selection. And it talks about this delegate, and in particular, this is the EK calendar chooser delegate. So we're going to create one of these. We're actually going to create a EK calendar chooser delegate, and we'll call this one implementation, because we're going to extend the actual existing delegate, which is provided by the IntelliSense here. And you'll notice these red lines here. Now, what's interesting here is that the delegates always provided on iOS are what's known as prototypes. Prototypes are just abstract representations, kind of like interfaces. So generally, when we're doing delegate programming with iOS, and in this case, of course, NativeScript, what we want to do is actually extend something abstract on the platform or something concrete, like an SObject. An SObject is the base class in all of iOS. So we're just going to extend that. And we're going to tell the framework that, in particular, this is a particular API that NativeScript provides that allows us to tie a delegate protocol to an actual TypeScript class here. And so we're going to create this chooser delegate. We're going to tell it that it uses this particular delegate protocol. Now, we can also use TypeScript implements here. As you might be used to with interfaces, we can have it implement this interface for the delegate. And that's going to give us IntelliSense to what properties we can actually implement here. So if we go back to the documentation, we can see that in particular, it gives us 3 methods that this protocol gives us. So calendar chooser, and we can see they're right there. So again, always with NativeScript, the platform is just a type keystroke away, and we're coding, again, directly with the platform. So we can actually implement these. Calendar chooser did cancel. We can see that it actually passes back a chooser instance. So we'll just type that here. This is calendar chooser. And the next one is calendar chooser did finish. We'll flesh this out here. And then the next one was calendar chooser selection did change. So we get notified on all these user interactions by the platform itself. This is not something we're really having to do other than just wiring up what the platform already gives us. I'm going to add some console log statements here so you can see this. We'll do it for each so we can actually see when they're called. Okay. And now that we have this, we basically have a delegate implementation now that we can now tie to this calendar chooser. So I'm going to create an instance of this delegate here. We'll call it calendar delegate. And we'll say new EK calendar chooser delegate. And I'll just keep a reference here so we have a way to track its life. And we can see here again, the same thing I was talking about here with EK calendar chooser. We actually don't want to pass arguments here because it implements a prototype, but actually you can see we're trying to construct a direct prototype, but we actually want to construct our concrete implementation here. So I'm just going to use the concrete implementation. And to tie these two together, all we're going to do is the calendar chooser delegate and set that to our calendar delegate here. Now, that is all we need to actually tie up the full communication between user interaction on iOS using actual iOS implementation details. Let's save that and see what we have. Now I choose tap and I make a selection, and look, we're getting those console logs there. And we can see that it's actually telling us that the user made a choice. This is when the change did occur. If we choose cancel, we can see we get the did cancel. We choose done, we get did finish. This is really powerful stuff here, and it's happening in a matter of minutes. And this, again, is really the power of NativeScript. So we're going to, again, keep going a bit further here. So when I choose cancel, I do want this to dismiss, and that happens on did cancel. So the question is how do we dismiss it from here? There's a couple different ways to do that. I'll show you one way here, and that is that the chooser is a view controller, so it always has a parent. Any view controller that's presented on the screen is going to have a parent, and we can actually just use the dismiss view controller animated completion, which is similar to present that we were looking at. We are going to animate it complete, and we don't care about a completion event here. Let's look at just that one. So this is just going to be did cancel, and we can confirm if it works. We choose tap, cancel, and there it dismisses. Wonderful. We actually want to do the same thing when we choose did finish, but instead of duplicating code, let's actually create a nice, concise, dry way to do this, and we'll make sure that we can control this from one place. Let's do this, and let's just use our dismiss API here. And I'll do the same thing here. Now they'll both dismiss. But we're missing, of course, one key element, and that is that we actually want to pass back what selection they made. So again, we're developing for the iOS platform. We can look at the docs and we can see what some of these provide here. So if we go in, we can see selected calendars. So this is actually what gives us the group of calendars that are selected by the user. We can see it tells us it's actually a type of a set, and it gives us EK calendar, and that's because the chooser selects multiple or single, so it'll always return a collection of calendars. So on did finish, we have access to that here. But now the big question is, how can we communicate from this delegate that receives our user interaction on iOS back to our target class here? We can use a methodology that is common on iOS, and you'll see this paradigm used a lot, and it's called init with owner. Basically, this is a way to statically create a concrete implementation where we provide the ability for our delegate to keep track of its owner that's creating it. So in this case, we are going to have an owner passed in, which will be our target class. And in this case, we want to use a weak ref because it's always a good practice not to have a direct reference to the calling class here. So we'll have a weak reference back to our actual calling class. And inside here, we can basically do exactly like we were doing in our class below here in creating itself. So this right here. And on that instance of the delegate, we just want to create a reference to the owner here. And we'll make sure there's a way to reference it here. In particular, we'll type it exactly the same. It's a weak ref. And this is just going to return that delegate. With that in mind, that is yet another powerful concept, and we can use it here. So we can call it statically, and we can just call init with owner. We can create a new weak ref, and the weak ref is going to be a reference to itself. We now have created a binding between a delegate, as you would directly on the iOS platform, and the calling target. This is a very powerful concept, and it stretches across the entire iOS platform. And what that allows us to do is actually communicate now. So the calendar chooser did finish. This is a user interaction. What we can do is actually grab our owner reference. Weak refs have a simple API that lets you get the actual concrete reference there. And let's create an API that will actually take this chosen calendar. Let's call it chose calendar. And this will take a calendar, and we'll just console out that we received one. User made selection. And we'll print out what that is. So from here, now, again, this is our concrete class. We actually get IntelliSense on it. There's chose calendar, and we can use that API that was specified in the docs, selected calendars, to get access to it. So let's see if we have it. There it is, selected calendars, and you can see it is typed just as it is in the docs. And an NSSet is a particular type of iOS object, and it gives us the ability to grab the entire collection of calendars. We're using a selection as an example, but again, you could have configured the chooser for multiple. But we'll take the all objects, and in particular, that gives us an NS array from iOS, and we can just grab the first one. Since we know it's a single selection, we always know the chosen calendar is going to be the first one. So with that in mind, let's save and see what we have now. And if I tap and I make a choice here, I'm going to choose US holidays, done, and look at what we have here. This is really a moment of awareness. We now have this full ability to communicate cross-spectrum across the platform, going directly to the source. We are actually pulling this straight from Apple Docs. We're pulling it straight from Apple examples that have been written by, and we are interacting directly with the platform without leaving the comfort of TypeScript. This is truly what NativeScript is really about. The concept in general stretches across a lot of paradigms, because as I showed here, I'm showing iOS, but you also have access to Java here. Things like Java lang.string. So if you were working on Android, you could gain access to the direct Android Java backbone right directly here too. Now, I'm going to do one thing here and see how quick we can pull it off here in about 5 minutes, and that is this concept of plugins. Now, the reason you want to create a NativeScript plugin is not to actually create something that is not created. It's actually to create a convenient and singular API between iOS and Android. So let's see if we can create one real quick. We can create a plugin here, and we're going to abstract what we coded directly in our class here and put it directly in our plugin. So I'm going to create a file here just for the package to represent it. All we need is a name. Let's call it calendar plugin, and we'll give it a version for good measure. And inside here, main is a key that represents the actual class that will be the entry point. We'll call it index, and we'll give it types to be a good TypeScript citizen in the TypeScript community. And let's just create our index here. Now we can refactor all of the code we just did here into this plugin here. So let's actually remove all this, everything we just did. And in fact, we can get rid of this. And we're just going to drop it actually directly into our plugin source. And I've already done this just to save time. But all we did is we have the same delegate implementation. We have a calendar plugin class that represents exactly what we coded in the other class. Now, I'm just going to add dependencies here to make IntelliSense light up on our plugin. And in particular, there's only a couple dependencies we need to actually make that work. And in particular, that is NativeScript core and the platform declarations itself. And we'll include TypeScript here just so we can compile our plugin. And we have a convenient script just to compile it. And I'll drop in tsconfig in here for good measure for our TypeScript compiler. Pretty typical tsconfig setup. We're just going to use declaration true to actually generate those typings that we mentioned here. And let's navigate into our plugin. And let's install the dependencies. Very quick. And then in order to get the IntelliSense to light up here, we're talking about platform declarations here. So we can use what's known as a references file. They'll actually light this up in TypeScript. So let's create references.d.ts. And this is going to reference the actual TypeScript declarations from NativeScript here. And we're referencing some globals that come from NativeScript core as well. And with that in mind, when we go back to our plugin, it now all lights up. We now have the same IntelliSense that we had in our class that we were doing. And you can see we have all the same stuff here because, again, it's actually those platform declarations that's making that work. Now let's see if we can compile it. That was easy. So now with it compiled, we have a JavaScript compiled source, and we have our typings file that was generated. And what we can do is we can simply pack that. And now what's really powerful about the concept of NativeScript is we've now encapsulated pure native behavior in a way that we have full control over and is now completely agnostic to share across many different flavors. So that singular plugin code we wrote in the vanilla flavor can now be used across all of these flavors. And we can do that simply by just referencing that package here. So we called it calendar plugin, and we can just use a file reference to go back to the plugin, and we'll just reference the actual pack. And that is all we need to actually tie that connection, and we'll be able to use that. So I'm going to go back inside of the sample vanilla just to show this actually at work. And I'm going to clear the node modules here, and actually we don't even need to do that. I was going to do a full clean, but we can actually just install it. And now we should have calendar plugin accessible to us inside of here. So let's see if it's here. And it was called calendar. Look at that. And we have IntelliSense on it. And the reason we have IntelliSense on it is because we added the types here, and the types tell us that that class is actually available in that plugin. Now to use it, all we need to do is actually just construct one. So we'll just rename this to our calendar plugin itself. This will be calendar plugin, and we'll remove this reference since we don't need it anymore. And this will be calendar plugin, and we'll just create that reference there. And we can just use its API now. So we can see that the calendar plugin has a show calendar method on it, and I'll show you that here. Same APIs that we typed manually inside that class, just isolated and refactored into a nice, concise plugin. And we can see we provided a show calendar API that calls the exact same methods we were calling that we typed manually, even showing the options that we did. And we set it up to take a callback. And we can take that here, and the callback is basically just going to give us that calendar that the user chose. Let's just put a console log here to see us. And this would shows calendar using NativeScript plugin. And let's print that here. And let's actually just run that and see how it works. This is a lot of information in an intro for sure, but I think it's important to establish really what the heart of NativeScript is about. And it really is about empowering JavaScript development, giving you the platform that you're actually developing for right at your fingertips, using the power of TypeScript to give you the strong type checking right against that platform. So here we can see the calendar is integrated now. It's totally refactored to a plugin. We're constructing it here. We get this prompt like we would expect. And now when we choose tap, we get the exact same calendar implementation, but we're actually getting it by way of a plugin now. Now, it's worth mentioning that the NativeScript community is a thriving community of a lot of talented developers who have created tons of plugins for NativeScript. You can view them at market.nativescript.org. You can also view a very thorough catalog listing of all sorts of plugins too that may not even be found on the official marketplace under plugins.nativescript.rocks. And you'll see there's a lot there. And in particular, this event plugin is already created by a great community contributor, Eddie Verbruggen. And I believe his plugin is called NativeScript Calendar. Let's take a look. Let's see. So GitHub wanted to re-authenticate me. There we go. So here's the calendar plugin. So Eddie already wrote this implementation on iOS, you can see here. So calendar.ios actually already integrates with Event Store. So all the stuff we typed ourselves manually, someone else in the community had actually already created a plugin for this. So it's a good rule of thumb when you're working with NativeScript and you want to integrate with the platform, always check the marketplace first, see if there's a plugin out there. Never be discouraged if you come across something that has not been officially created as a plugin, because again, you have access to everything right there at your fingertips. So even if there isn't a plugin created for it, you're ready to type against it right away today. You don't need to wait for a plugin to become available because you have access to those APIs right now. But do always check the plugins. The community has some really nice plugins that do consolidate APIs on both platforms for iOS and Android and give you strong type checking against TypeScript that way. And with that in mind, the last note I'll make is, again, because this is now a plugin written in TypeScript, just coding against something that's already available on the platform, we could put the same dependency across every single flavor, React, Svelte, Angular, Vue, and it'll work exactly the same because we're working with a consistent, mature platform that already has all of these features built into it. And with that, that is a mouthful, but I'll hand it back to Sarah for any questions.
Thank you so much, Nathan. That was a wonderful presentation. It doesn't look like we have any comments coming in at this point.
That was a lot to take in.
Yes. So with that, thank you all so much for coming. If you have anything else, Nathan, that you'd like to add, we definitely have time, a little bit of time for that.
I'll mention something about styling. So NativeScript, because it is using the power of JavaScript and a lot of web development practices, I didn't mention that the styling is done through CSS. So just as you would style something on the web through CSS, NativeScript is no different. It provides the ability to style all the controls through CSS. But it's worth mentioning that the native layer really is probably something that will be optional in the future. It's been a part of NativeScript since the beginning. And just because you do have access to the native platform, it does not prevent you from coding native views and using the native view structures on iOS and Android platforms as is, and you can style them with CSS. But the power of NativeScript actually accessing that native platform is something that's beneficial across any JavaScript development stack. Like I mentioned, Ionic, which just uses a web view with styling for the web in the DOM inside of it. You could still use NativeScript to access and gain direct access to the platform with the runtime. And so again, more will be provided on that in FAQ and some detail and probably an official beta towards the end of August.
Wonderful.
If you have any questions, you can send a support inquiry to either support@nativescript.org. There's a contact page on the NativeScript site too if you just have a question. We're happy to answer questions along any inquiry all across the board. So it's exciting to engage with any questions that you guys have out there. Just let us know.
Great. Nathan, again, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you for tuning in.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks.